Hi, good afternoon. This is the Thaiger here in Phuket. We're with the founder of Banyan Tree Resorts and Hotels, KP Ho. KP, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I just came out of ASQ, so I'm really happy.
Okay, tell us about that. I know years ago, when you were a journalist, you spent a little time in another locked up establishment. How do you compare those two?
I was just comparing that to myself. I spent about 2 months in solitary confinement in a 2 by 2 meter square cell with no lighting, no windows, nothing. By comparison, this 14 days of solitary confinement is real luxury. So it was okay, but it wasn't something I'd love to do again.
Any good takeaways? Did you learn anything from the quarantine experience?
I learned quite a bit of trade secrets, which I'm not going to tell you about. I've told all my colleagues about, but if I told you, then it'd be out. Okay. But I've learned enough trade secrets about how to make the ASQ experience more pleasurable.
Okay, well, we're going to learn about that hopefully sometime later. In terms of Thailand right now, you guys have managed assets, you have owned hotels here as well, you have a lot of exposure to the Thai market. Nobody saw this coming, but how would you compare 97 to SARS, to the GFC, and now coming into COVID? What's the differences?
I think the main difference between 97, SARS, tsunami, GFC, and so on, and now, and what I've discussed with my colleagues today and all the meetings I've had with them, is that those were really very sharp and acute crises for which everyone felt the acuteness of the crisis, that the adrenaline really pumped in as if you had had a bad accident, and people were just gearing themselves for how to fight back. Here, there's a real prolonged sense of fatigue. And that's the sense that I think I feel everyone feeling now, at least in the hospitality industry. This, what in the West is the second lockdown.
Right.
Here, of course, it's not a second lockdown, but it's when is Thailand going to open up? And that's the fatigue of how long can we go on like this? That anxiety, which is very deep-seated. Yeah. It's not rah urgency. We need to do this. We need to do that. That all happened in the initial 6 months. All retrenchments that needed to be done, all hotel closures, they were all done. Now it's a long waiting game, and it's very tiring on the soul and the spirit.
Right. I think something that's interesting for us certainly is going further, from the learnings from COVID as we start looking ahead, how our business is going to change, certainly from a manpower case. Asia's always been lagging the West, certainly in manpower practices and everything else, and how Asia's going to reinvent themselves again. Do you see probably Asia taking on those practices of the West and being more labor efficient, more cognizant of those type of things going
Absolutely.
forward?
I think there's two human capital, human talent implications from this. The first is exactly what you've said. And we've done that. And one of the things I've told all my colleagues is that coming out of COVID, as we want to build back better, as everyone says, one of the things we've got to do is that all the restructuring gains that we had, we've got to deepen and preserve. We've got to do a lot more multi-skilling. We've got to do a lot more automation. We've got to have a lot more flexible labor policies, which people have had in the West. We've got to keep going at that and not see it as something short-term we do and then go back to the old ways of doing things. But the other human capital implication is one which I think is good for all the Asian economies. And that is we're going through a period of at least 12 to 18 months of largely domestic tourism. Occupancies will be low. The expats are going to be quite expensive. A lot will leave. And a lot of your middle level Thai management will have an opportunity to try to prove themselves in a cultural milieu they're more familiar with and with less pressure. So after COVID, they may really be able to develop themselves to take on even more senior management.
Right. We think the period of reinvention is enormous. Something that interests me also is, in terms of a talent search, hospitality is no longer certainly up there in terms of anywhere in Asia. And how is Asia, how are we going to reinvent hospitality or hotels going forward to really get the best talent out there? What is it going to take for the hotel business in Asia to get that talent back? Now they're going in tech, they're going in financial services, they're in other industries. That's the biggest gap for me, is how do we get the biggest and best talent back into hospitality in Asia?
Well, it depends which country you're in. The model I would look at in terms of the sense of a service culture, which Thailand in fact is quite good in, is that in Thailand the idea of a service culture is not tied in with the idea of servitude as it would be in many Western countries. So in many Western countries, you really don't want to be in hospitality because you don't want to be serving someone else.
Right.
And that's why we've been doing this whole time. The entire slogan for our service culture, which we're trying to roll across to all our brands, is I am with you, which is not I serve you, but I empathize with you and I know where you're coming from. And it means service with self-respect. If you look at Japan, that's a great example of a country which has got a lot of innovative practices,
right.
Labor scarce, and yet those places that you go to, like for the ryokans and restaurants and so on, it's a very genuine service culture that they give to each other. And the Japanese server deserves to be respected because he respects himself and the customer respects him. So we have to develop this sense of mutual respect, which has not been there in the past.
Because you have to balance the scales. Really.
Yes, you have to balance the scales. And if you get it right, I think this is something we're emphasizing a lot on as we grow out of COVID.
I think let's move off COVID. We're not going to solve that one today. But Banyan Tree, you're now looking at the Banyan Tree Escape. Tell us a little bit about Banyan Tree Escape, because that kind of seems something well-timed to a post-COVID travel environment.
Yeah, it is. The first one will be opening soon in Buahan in Ubud, and we're hoping to do one in Chiang Mai, in land that we've owned for a long time, which we're now doing a very good organic farm with a partner. As you know, Banyan Tree started out as a boutique hotel brand. And for business reasons, we did not want to stay boutique-y, although it's quite nice to do so, but from a business point of view, it doesn't make sense. We've now become actually a relatively respectable mainstream luxury brand. We've got 350 rooms to a hotel, which we never would have thought of. We've got city hotels in Shanghai, Kuala Lumpur, and so on, which we never would have done. But as we move that towards that direction of being mainstream luxury, we want to keep the brand edgy. And that's why Banyan Tree Escape is a return to really rustic norms, plant to table, farm to table, plant-based cuisine, adventure-based, very simple lifestyle, not a very high room rate, but preserving all the values of romance, of intimacy, adventure, innovation. That is really what Banyan Tree stands for. And in that way, we think we can have Banyan Tree Escape be a profit generator, of course, but it won't move the needle. But what it will do is it will make the whole brand more edgy. And we're very cognizant of the fact that if you don't keep a brand edgy as it moves mainstream, it becomes another very dull, boring mainstream brand. I
think it's interesting coming full circle. We've seen Almond to a point do something similar in terms of pivoting towards something new in a post-Zeka era towards that as well. But I know you're working with James Noble, certainly in the farm-to-table experience up in Chiang Mai as well, and that type of thing. Are you going to see that across all your properties in other countries as well?
I mean, in terms of, well, we are learning from James. We're trying to do a lot of our properties have got large pieces of rural land. So starting with James, we intend to try to do. James has two parts of what he's doing. One part is the growing the food for your own hotels and having your own plant-based cuisine, which he's really going to be working with us as Origins, as a brand, restaurant brand, which we'll try to do elsewhere in Banyan Tree hotels.
Sure.
But he's also got another part of it which may not be replicable everywhere, and that's the retained farming, which he's doing as a commercial business. And that's probably only in areas like Thailand where there are quite a lot of five-star hotels.
The Michelin restaurants.
Yeah, Michelin restaurants, five-star hotels. They want the high-value import substitution kind of vegetables, which only a Michelin chef would know, because only James actually knows. When I was just at his farm the other day, and he was introducing me to all these little flowers that would be edible flowers that chefs import from Europe by air and so on, and we're growing them here in Thailand. But it would take a Michelin chef to know what another Michelin chef wants.
You've been a pioneer here in Phuket, and you've seen Phuket change over the years. And I know there's a criticism of Thailand right now saying 20% of GDP or thereabouts being for tourism as well. Do you think the mass model has to go away? I mean, we can't, in Phuket we've got over 90,000 hotel keys as well. We can't go backwards, but is the criticism due? How do you think Phuket should plan the future going forward in terms of a tourism footprint?
Well, first of all, as you know, you can't plan too many things in Thailand.
Yes.
Things happen on their own with some degree of planning. And that's part of the excitement of Thailand. As a person who's lived here that long, you know that part of the excitement of Thailand is that it grows organically, right? If it were a nanny state and everything is totally urban planned, it would lose a lot of its charm. That's one point. So I don't think you can plan too much simply because it won't work in Thailand. And the second part of it is that the flip side of the bad term, mass tourism, is actually democratic tourism. I'm all in favor of the idea that more people who don't need to be private jet setter people have access to the beautiful things and the cultural beauty and environmental beauty that rich people get to have. Sure. So mass tourism has nothing wrong with it. You have to regulate it properly, and you have to ensure that the infrastructure, which is critical, you have to ensure that the infrastructure is there to be able to take that many people, and you regulate it. You look at the US national park system, is one of the best in the world. We've got a lot of stuff going on in China, and we built our Banyan Tree Ringha, really remote part of Tibet. So I know a bit about what's happening with China. And the Chinese are really taking the examples of the US national park systems and now building that across China too. Regulating the influx of visitors, but ensuring at the same time that you have the infrastructure for it, rather than adopt a Bhutan model, which frankly seems very nice to the super rich, but even to the Bhutanese themselves, I think there's some questions as to it's not sustainable. The Bhutanese, foreigners love to see Bhutanese living in their little mud shacks, but the Bhutanese would like to have 4G and so on and so forth. Exactly. So you cannot, people who are only against mass tourism are usually the people who are already among the elites. Sure. And I don't think that's the right approach.
Sure. Maybe one final question today is interesting about democratic tourism. I believe the same thing, certainly. Maybe in terms of 2021, we're all saying what's going to happen. Nobody really knows what's going to happen, but you've got a big business empire to run with Banyan Tree globally, but also here in Thailand and Phuket as well. How are you trying to foresee next year? Are you staying nimble? Are you saying, is it a positive outlook? Is it an optimistic outlook? Is it a negative outlook? What's your planning strategy?
I think our planning strategy has got to be, across the group, it's got to be resilient. And that's meaning you stay with relatively low borrowings, and you try to be cash positive all the time, and always to be resilient against surprises. I'll give you an example. In China, our hotels, we've got 20 over hotels in China, are doing better than they were ever doing pre-COVID, because of course, tens of millions of Chinese who would have otherwise gone to Paris or New York can't go anywhere, and they're going to other luxury hotels. So China is booming, and the strategy right now for China is just to grow with the boom. But anything could happen. I mean, they could have another massive lockdown. You just don't know. So even though they're hugely positive, they've got to be resilient. Thailand, where we have quite a bit of investments, I think the recognition is that all these things about bubbles, all these things about STVs and so on, it's going to be talked about. It's going to be launched. But by the time it hopefully becomes effective, we will have long gone. The horse has left the stables.
Out of the stable and we're all gone.
It's way out of the stables. So the only hope I think we can see for Thailand is something simple that a government would do, not complicated things like STV, but for example, reducing the quarantine from 14 days, now they say 10 days, and maybe 10 days to 7 days. And maybe in 7 days, it will be the first 2 days you stay in quarantine, and then the other days you can stay in the resort. And then maybe more and more testing. So it's got to be something very simple and executable. Otherwise, if you look at STV, we've had our colleagues call to various Thai embassies and TAT authorities around the world, and many of them don't even know what the STV procedure is. So by the time people actually get around to knowing what it involves and the amount of paperwork it took me to get to Thailand, and I've got a work permit, would daunt anyone who would want to come to Thailand. So I think we have to just wait. But it's not all negative. Domestic tourism, Thailand's a large country. Yes. Thailand is a newly rich country. It's getting richer and richer. I went to Phuket and drove down the west coast. It's all deserted. But then I went to the walking street on Sunday. It's all Thais. A lot of Thais beginning to appreciate their own domestic tourism. And as you probably know, a lot of Thais are now exploring parts of Thailand they didn't know before. And that's happening all across Asia. So I think the flip side of this is that when things recover, I've been telling my colleagues, a sustainable tourism for us in Thailand would be probably something like 15%, even hopefully 20% domestic market. Right now, it's less than 5%. That's not sustainable if another major international crisis happens again.
Great. I think some great insights. We never found out really why you love the quarantine, but we'll leave that for now.
I'll tell you afterwards.
Okay, KB. Oh, thank you very much for the Thaiger, and thank you, Thailand, and we'll look forward to 2021. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill.